Welcome to the Snakes Are Us TV podcast, presented by Southeastern Reptile Rescue. I'm Jason Clark, and it's showtime.
Are you ready?
Here we are for episode number 14 of the Snakes Are Us TV podcast. My name is Jason Clark. I am with Southeastern Reptile Rescue. We have Snakes Are Us TV on YouTube and the Snakes Are Us TV podcast. And we record it every Thursday night at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time sharp. We're never late, always right on the dot. 8 p.m. sharp is when we, that's not true, because it is 8:11 and we're just now starting. Anyway, if you ever listen to this on any streaming platforms and you want to be on the live chat, live when we record this, if you go to YouTube, our channel, we record this live there, and you can join in the live chat and kind of be in that part with us. But on this episode, since it's on Thanksgiving, I thought it might be appropriate to discuss food. And yes, I mean food that snakes eat, food that our reptiles eat, food that they don't eat. And sometimes maybe they even eat us, okay? So today, Thanksgiving can be a tricky holiday for a lot of people. One, we have international listeners and watchers and participants from all over the world. And so if they're not from the United States, they don't celebrate Thanksgiving. Maybe some version of it or something, but, Americans celebrate Thanksgiving for different reasons than most of the other world would. But anyway, so that is an American holiday. So a lot of our international listeners don't really care much about our Thanksgiving, and I understand that. So this can be kind of a hard time of year for some people because maybe they used to celebrate Thanksgiving and maybe they've lost family members or people, or maybe they didn't have a good Thanksgiving growing up. There's a lot of reasons people wouldn't want to celebrate it. Anyway, hopefully, whether you celebrate Thanksgiving or whether you do not, hopefully you've had a good Thursday. That's what today is. And my Thanksgivings growing up have always been pretty good. My mom is actually a really good cook, and I've always gone to her house, and she cooks a big dinner, and we always go over there, my family, and eat and have a good time. And that's always been fun. And I want to mention something about going to my mom's house. It involves my sister, which I don't like to talk about her a whole lot because, it's my sister, But anyway, I was trying to think of some things about food related. And I think I came up with quite a few ideas, just trying to remember some of the things that have happened over the years, not just to me, but other people or things I've had to go deal with. And we get a lot of questions all the time about our snakes and our alligators and our tortoises. And people always ask, what do you feed them? Well, they kind of all eat the same thing, just about. The tortoises don't. Tortoises are different. And it's funny, I think out of all the animals that I keep, the tortoises are probably the most expensive ones to feed, because this time of year when it's cold, they don't do well being outside. So I have to get them into a heated building, and we heat our buildings with propane. That way, if we have a winter storm and we have a power outage, the gas will still be going and we'll keep them heated. We won't have electricity in the house. We'll just go to the tortoise building or the snake building and be warm. But power goes out, they're still warm. So that's how we do that. But the tortoises, they like to stay active all year, at least the sulcata tortoises that we keep. And as long as they're warm, they'll be eating all year long. And when I go in, especially if I rescue a tortoise, if I go to someone's house and I pick up a tortoise, they bring me a tortoise that they've cared for, maybe they're moving and can't keep it for whatever reason. The tortoises that have the prettiest shells that are really smooth with no pyramiding and weird growth on them, and that they have the best body weight to these tortoises, I ask them, what do you feed them? And most of these people that have the best looking tortoises say the same thing. I mean, not much of anything. He just sits out here in the yard and eats grass all day. But when you have a tortoise and you feed them tons of strawberries and lots of fruit full of sugars and certain vegetables, that kind of makes them grow a lot faster in some cases, and their shell grows too fast, and then their shell gets kind of deformed. You can feed them those things, but depending on the species of tortoise, you really kind of have to take it easy. I'll actually mow the lawn in certain areas with a push mower at my house, and it has a bagger on it, and I'll take the bag and dump it into the tortoise yard, and they just love that freshly cut grass from the yard, and that's the best thing for them, in my opinion. Sometimes we do feed them hay. We'll just go buy like horse hay almost and feed them that. They'll eat some of that. But we do get them vegetables and different things from the store, like leafy green, dark leafy green vegetables sometimes. And it's always funny because for instance, if I go in and I get some, a big bundle of collard greens or something, I put them on the counter, and it happens all the time. And the lady ringing me up, she'll say, "Oh, I want to come to your house and eat." I'm like, "Ma'am, you don't want to eat this at my house." She's like, "Oh yeah, I love that stuff." I said, "No, you don't. You wouldn't like how I prepare it." She said, "Well, how do you do it?" I said, "Well, I get home and I take this rubber band off of it and I throw it on the ground." And she just looks at me like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah, this is my tortoise's treats. They come over and they'll devour all this, And she's like, "Oh, okay, that's not what I was expecting." But the tortoises are really cool to keep, but they can be a little bit more work just because of what we have to feed them. When we're feeding the snakes and alligators, most of what they eat, not all of them, but most of what they eat are mice and rats. And depending if they're really big, sometimes even rabbits or chicken. But the good thing about that is we can actually store that stuff in the freezer. And if you raise it yourself, it's a lot cheaper than buying fresh vegetables and things at the grocery store. Some people often suggest, well, you can get the stuff they're throwing out. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be getting them, old vegetables to feed them. If I'm going to feed them vegetables at all to supplement their grass and everything else to eat, I'd like to get them fresh stuff. So we try not to do that. One question I get all the time, and this question usually comes in around deer season when people are out hunting deer and all this kind of stuff, and they'll shoot a deer, and they'll have all this leftover pieces of deer. Maybe they don't want all the deer meat, maybe they want some of it, or maybe they'll have a whole leg quarter of a deer, and they'll say, "Hey, I know this shouldn't go to waste. Let's give it to Jason. He can throw this whole leg quarter in there with his big alligators, and they'll eat it." Well, if we did that, yeah, my alligators would eat it, and I'm sure they wouldn't complain a bit about it. But I don't do that. And the reason I don't do that is it messes the water up something horribly, okay? Now, if they're out in a natural lake or pond or a river or creek or something somewhere and the water's flowing, there's all this other animals that eat all the little pieces that get left behind from the gators ripping this apart, then that's fine. But this is a little tiny concrete pond, and whatever gets thrown in there kind of stays in there until I help get it and clean it out. So it's not good to be putting really huge things that the gators have to rip apart and make a mess of where they're living to eat. In the wild, it's a great thing, but we try not to do that in captivity. I try to feed them things that they can basically grab their mouth and just swallow whole without having to rip it apart, even though that can be fun for some people to see. But it's weird when I talk about alligators because I've often gone to zoos and nature centers somewhere, and if you look at enough alligators, over time you can kind of start to tell if someone just shows you a photo of a gator, you can kind of start to tell if that gator is living in captivity or raised in captivity or if it's a wild gator, just by the alligator's head. I've noticed this a lot. Now, not all gators in captivity look this way. Seminole, one of my big gators I've had for, 18 years or so, he's, 9 foot, and he doesn't look this way. And I'll tell you why he doesn't. So what happens is, when alligators are born, when they're hatched, okay, and I showed you some hatchling gators on one of the recent podcasts. We got a bunch of little hatchling gators in right now that I'm raising some up. But when these gators are hatched, they typically grow about 8 to 10 inches a year. If they're in the wild and fed on a normal diet, that's about average, 8 to 10 inches a year. And as they're growing, I'm going to fix me some coffee while we're doing this. As they're growing, they eat and they get hungrier, and as they get hungrier, they eat more and more. And so as they increase in size, they stop growing as quick once they reach about 5 feet or so. Well, once they get about 5 feet in length, that's when they've hit sexual maturity. And at that point, their growth rate slows down tremendously, okay? And so a 10-foot alligator, a 12-foot alligator, that's a pretty old alligator. Because like I said, once they hit 5 feet, that growth rate is not 8 or 10 inches a year. It could be 1 inch a year. It depends on how much food the gator is getting at that point. So the growth rate slows tremendously. Now, when you have that gator in captivity, and it's not out there having to compete for food and hunt for food and do all these different things, and it's just getting food on a daily basis. Maybe this is a zoo that's open to the public and they do daily feedings and they just give the alligators as much as they want to eat so they can grow the alligators to be really big so they're impressive and people want to pay money to come into the zoo to see the big gators. And that's fine. I think having alligators in zoos and in captivity for public to see and appreciate and learn about, so they will appreciate these animals, the ones that live in the wild too. I don't have a problem with that as long as they're kept, appropriately. But what I see is when you feed these gators a lot, especially if it's just meat, leftover meat and things like that, the gators grow so fast that the bones in the gator grow pretty slow. And the gator's body outgrows her head, okay? So you got this big old gator that's like a 10-foot alligator with the head of a gator from a 5-foot alligator. His head should be this long, but his head's like this long. It just looks weird. Now, if you don't see enough alligators, you may never notice this. But once you see enough wild alligators, and then you see one that's in captivity, you start to be able to tell a difference in that. And so I try not to overfeed our gators, but I also try to feed, if I'm feeding just pieces of meat, I will feed pieces of meat that sometimes also have bone in them, and that helps their bones grow. They get calcium from that. But in addition to that, they also need to have, this is so gross talking about this, some organ meat, okay? So I try to also, instead of just feeding them chunks of meat, like chicken breast or chicken thighs or whatever, I also try to feed them whole animals that have the liver and the heart and all these organs, so they get all the vitamins and minerals they need from that too. And even feeding them fish and things like that, shrimp, so varying their diet quite a bit will actually keep these big gators pretty healthy. And it's fun feeding them different foods. That makes their life a little bit more enjoyable doing that. That's why we don't feed big pieces of deer meat and things like that. Now, this time of year in November, like here in Georgia today, I want to say where I live, the high, I think I saw it as I was driving, was like 66, I noticed today. So it's pretty warm here. And so you can see gators out basking, things like that. But typically, once we get to this time of year, my gators don't really eat at all. There's enzymes in their stomach that help them digest food, and those enzymes don't really activate when the temperature is too low. So that's why you'll see turtles basking on a log. They're not just doing it because the sun feels good. They're doing that to raise their body temperature to help digest their food. For instance, if I were to take a reptile, it doesn't matter, an alligator, lizard, snake, turtle, whatever it is, and I feed it and then I cool it down, well, if the animal doesn't get that out of their system and regurgitate it and throw it up or get rid of it somehow, if it sits in their stomach at that cold temperature, the food just kind of rots in them and will kill them. So once we get to these colder months, my alligators, the ones outside anyway, they just stop eating. Now, the little gators I keep inside because they're kept warm, they just eat all year long, but the big ones outside don't. One really cool thing, speaking of cold weather, I've actually got a video on my YouTube channel about this, and it talks about how alligators survive the winter. And one thing that usually happens, at least one time here in Georgia, sometimes more than once, but usually only about once, is we'll have some really cold weather where the water freezes over. The pond out in your yard may freeze over, may have like 1 inch or 2 thick of ice. Not really enough for me to walk on because I found that out when I was a kid, fell through the ice. When the water temperature here in central Georgia starts to get low enough, just before freezing, what I've noticed is my gators surface and they stick their nose up just above the surface, just the tip of their nose where their nostril is up. Then as the temperature continues to drop, the water freezes around their snout. It's so cool. It's called the icing behavior. Crocodiles and caimans aren't known to do this. Just alligators. They kind of drop their heartbeat down to somewhere like 1 beat a minute or something. And it's insane. It's crazy. And they're just like barely living, barely alive almost, it seems. They're just going to this dormant state that's called brumation. And, brumation is similar to hibernation. Hibernation is what we think about mammals do, and they go into hibernation at a certain time of year. They come out at a certain time of year. But reptiles brumate, and that's more temperature dependent, meaning that they go into brumation at a certain temperature and come out at a certain temperature, and that temperature can be different depending on what species you're talking about. Some snakes handle cooler temperatures better than other ones do. So that means in the middle of the winter here in the South, if it's a mild day, you can see reptiles out active and moving around. That's definitely possible. Now, as far as feeding gators, one thing that I think I really, really need to mention, I wish I'd have pulled the story up to refresh my memory. If one of you goes, if you're on the live chat, you can go Google this, tell me if I've got my facts straight or not. But several years ago in Florida, there was, I think this was Florida. Now, I may be wrong. Maybe it was Louisiana. I want to say it was Florida. But there was a guy running like an airboat tour. Now, I've been on these airboat tours. They're a lot of fun. If you go to Louisiana, the coast somewhere, Florida, there's a lot of airboat tours you get on. They go out and show you gators, and you pay per person to ride. But the airboat captain wants to do a really good job because he works off tips. They'll have a sign on there, asking for tips, and that's great. And they really want to do a good job. So if you go on an airboat ride and you don't see any gators, well, you may not get as many tips. But if you do see gators, you'll get some tips. But if you see gators and then you see the gators doing some crazy stuff, you see some activity going on, then, man, you'll really get some tips then. So this one airboat captain had a habit of feeding the alligators, which is illegal. It's illegal to feed wild alligators, and there's a reason for that. When you start to feed a gator, that gator starts to look at you as food. My gators here, I try to condition them with different targets and things that we work with them. So when I'm feeding them, they'll associate food with something else other than me. That way, when they do get big and I go in there, they're not, oh yeah, he's here, he's food. And then they just go eat me. So we try to start training them really young to disassociate food with me, okay? It's important. But when you're feeding these gators in the wild, they're not doing that. They just say, oh, here's some more people. Let's approach them and eat. Most of the gator attacks that you hear about, most of those are from people who at some point were feeding alligators. And the alligator got used to people. So definitely not a good thing. So anyway, this guy, this airboat captain, he has a habit of going out and feeding gators. And I don't know what he was feeding the gators or how he was doing this. But as he's doing something, reaching in the water or putting food in the water or doing something, the gator bites his hand off. Bites it off, takes his hand and separates his hand from his arm. He loses his hand. I hope he got some tips. I hope he got enough tips to make up for his hand. But he goes to the hospital, and from what I understand from the story, law enforcement show up at the hospital and ticket him, give him a ticket. They charge him with illegally feeding the gators because he fed the gators his hand. That's basically what he did. He fed them his hand, which is illegal to do, and he got ticketed for that. So, don't be feeding the gators hand. On my alligator fence out here, I have a drawing of a little stick man getting eaten by an alligator. And it says, please do not enter. If our alligators eat you, it might make them sick. Because, if you got clothes on and shoes, they'll eat that too. We don't want them to get sick by that. So anyway, now when I go in my alligator pen, I actually have a shovel handle. It doesn't have the metal on the end, just a wooden handle about 4 foot long that I take in there with me. And because sometimes these gators will approach you and try to bite your leg or eat you or eat your hand off or something. So this stick is about this big around, and it's not, you don't hit the gators with it. It's nothing like that. Basically what I do is I just kind of take the gator and just kind of touch their snout gently and push them back. Sometimes if I'm walking past a gator and he's just kind of laying there chilling on the bank, I will take the stick as I'm walking and I kind of put the stick on the ground as I walk past it. That way, if he does like a head thrash toward me, his head hits the stick and he doesn't come and hit my leg, which I've had happen quite a few times. That stick has got teeth marks all over that stick out there. So should have brought it in here to show you guys. But so that's how I feed my gators. And now if you go to Florida now, and I'm sure this is probably the same, especially around tourist areas in other states too, but Florida is such a touristy destination that they kind of have to do it here. Is they have signs up everywhere you go. If there's a mud puddle in a driveway, there's probably a sign saying, "Watch out for this puddle that's 3 inches deep." Probably a gator in it. Okay, and so I just noticed this even more. When I went to Florida this summer for vacation, we went to Disney, and I took the girls down there, and I noticed every canal there's just alligator signs, and they got snakes in it too. Alligators and snakes, warning, do not feed, do not approach, there's dangerous wildlife here. And a lot of that came to be due to the attack that happened down there at the resort, with the unfortunate attack where the child was killed by the gator. When that happened, I had a lot of news media calling me and asking if they could do an interview and just get my take on it and kind of what I thought about the situation. And I was often asked, do you think the resort, the theme park down there, are they at fault for this? And, my position was no, I don't think. I mean, it's horrible. But, I mean, when you go to Florida and you're at the edge of the water, and there's all these weeds and stuff growing up, because I've been to this area where this event happened. I know where it happened. And you're at the edge of the water, and it's dusk, and you're splashing the edge of the water. You're where gators eat. You're there when gators eat, and you look like what gators eat. Gators are probably going to try to eat you. I mean, that's what's going to happen. Now, if you're at your resort and you're in your room and a gator comes in your room and attacks you in your room, the resort is at fault. But people's like, well, there's no signs up there. That doesn't matter. People don't read signs. We'll set our exhibit up and we'll put signs out all over the place, and people don't read any of the signs we put out there. They still ask the same questions. And so people, but is it Florida that has the most shark attacks of anywhere in the world? If it's not number one, I bet you it's number two. And I don't think I've ever been to a beach in Florida and seen a sign that says, hey, there's sharks in the ocean. When you go in the ocean, watch for sharks or stingrays. I've seen jellyfish signs. And I have seen stingray signs that said do the stingray shuffle, but I've never seen watch out for sharks. I mean, I'm sure there's some somewhere, but anyway, people don't read signs. Even if you put signs up, all that does is that's just, I think, trying to take liability off people so that they don't get sued or something. But I don't think it's going to stop people from doing dumb stuff. But as unfortunate as that is, you have to protect yourself when you go to places that you're not sure of. Like I don't know about bears. Okay, I know that bears bite people. How do I know that? I've been bitten by a bear. Okay, I got bit by a bear. If you want to hear the bear story, go to the episode, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5, whatever it was, it talks about bites. I'll tell you about me getting bit by a bear. And so I know that bears bite. So if I go somewhere and there's bears, especially like brown bears, we got black bears here in Georgia. I know about them, but brown bears, I'm going to be like, okay, I need to figure out what do I do if I encounter a bear, and I'm going to try to understand that. I heard a story one time about, because a bear will eat you, a brown bear anyway, if you run from it, and could I outrun a bear? I doubt I could outrun a bear, but I heard this story one time of people were saying that if you're in an area where there's black bear, you want to wear like little tiny bells on your clothes. So when you walk, the bells jingle. Keep you some bear spray, pepper spray with you. And you want to have that. And then also you want to recognize the signs to look for if you're hiking on a trail of to know if bears are in the area. Learn what their scat looks like, their poop. If you find black bear scat, it may have like little pieces of berries in it, you know. Brown bear scat has little bells in it and smells like pepper, they say. Anyway, we went on a camping trip. Speaking of bears eating people, we went on a camping trip one time in North Georgia. We're doing primitive camping, and it was my mom and my kids and my sister, and our whole family's up there, and we were doing primitive camping. We got there after dark. So we're setting up our tents in the dark. There's no electricity. It's just on the side of a mountain in North Georgia. Once all the tents are set up, somebody shines a flashlight on a tree and happens to see this sign on a tree from the state agency here in Georgia that basically said this camping area is closed due to aggressive bear activity. Well, that sent everybody into a panic. Then they start looking, and they're like, every tree we look at around this campsite, how did we not see this? There's all these warnings all around our entire campground of do not be here because of the aggressive bear activities and the attacks that they've been having right here where we're camped. Now everybody's freaking out, wanting to take their tents down. I'm like, look, guys, it's fine. We're already here. The tents are already set up. Just when you walk out at night to go to the bathroom, well, just pay attention, have a flashlight. It's fine. They did not listen to anything that I said. And so I finally had to tell them that I made the signs ahead of time, printed them out, laminated them, brought a stapler with me to staple them up to all these trees as they're pitching the tents and getting all these things set up. They didn't believe, they thought I was making it up because I didn't want to leave. I had to go get the stapler out of the truck and the extra papers I have not stapled yet and show them, look, I made this just to mess with y'all. And it worked better than I thought it would. Anyway, we did end up staying and not leaving, but they didn't like that. I did. They didn't enjoy it. Anyway, let's get on to some snakes. We talked about alligators. Let's get to some snakes now. So what do we feed our snakes? We feed our snakes mice and rats, mainly. Sometimes if it's a big snake, sometimes we may feed it rabbits. The biggest snake I've ever owned, people ask me this a lot, what's the biggest snake you ever owned and what did you feed it? The biggest thing I've ever owned was a reticulated python, the retic. And this snake came from a pet shop that was closing down. They had it on display. It wasn't for sale. They had it on display in this huge enclosure when you walked in. And it wasn't in Georgia. It was out of state, in a different state. And they contacted me, wanted me to get the snake. And this snake was somewhere in the neighborhood of about 18 feet long. It was a massive, massive retic. Reticulated pythons don't get real thick. Burmese pythons do. Anacondas do. But retics don't. And this retic, it was a thick, thick snake. When the snake came into us, it was not in the best condition. The humidity had been too low where they were keeping it. When it would go to shed its skin, it couldn't get the skin off because the humidity was too low. And so the skin would stay on the snake. Then it would go into another shed and another shed and another shed cycle. And all these layers of dead skin were on the snake and could not come off. And so we took a lot of time of trying to fix that situation with the snake. And the snake refused to eat. But luckily, it had a lot of body fat, okay? It had a lot of body fat and was okay with not eating for a while. People call me all the time and say, hey, my ball python is not eating in 3 or 4 weeks or 2 months. I'm so scared. What do I do? And I'll ask them, well, let me ask you some questions. What temperature are you keeping it at? What about the hiding places? What substrate? What are you feeding it? How are you feeding it? And one question I asked was, how often do you hold your snake? Are you taking up time with your snake? They'll say, yeah, I hold it every day. I'm like, okay, well, that's your problem. Stop holding your snake. People think that snakes want to be held by them. None of them want to be held by you. They may like your body heat. That's about it. Sometimes you can hold these snakes and not stress them out. But a lot of times it does cause a somewhat stress to the snake to hold the snake. And so if you're holding the snake every single day and it's not eating, well, stop holding it and go put it in an enclosure somewhere. I've got a rattlesnake that we got that we couldn't relocate. It was about a 4 or 5 foot timber rattlesnake. And so it's really more difficult to get an adult wild-caught venomous snake to eat than it is one born in captivity or one caught in the wild that's small. So the way I did this was I put this big rattlesnake, who was not friendly at all, very stressed out, very high-strung rattlesnake, I put it into an enclosure with a hide box and some clean substrate, and I put a big, fresh, clean bowl of water in there, and I closed the door. And this is in my in my building, and I left the snake alone. I can go by and look in the window and see the snake, and I can see him in there, see he's okay. But I didn't open it to check on him. I didn't open it to feed him. I didn't open it to change his water because he had plenty of water in the bowl. And I did this for a little over a month without touching that snake or interacting with him in any way. The only interaction we'd have is he'd see me walk by the enclosure. That's about it. And he'd rattle a little bit, and then he'd kind of calm down and not rattle as much. And after about a month or a little over a month, I decided, okay, it's time to try to feed this snake. And I put a rat in the cage, an appropriately sized rat in the enclosure. And if you're wondering, was this a live rat or a dead rat? Well, this was a live rat. A lot of people don't like feeding live, and I completely understand why you don't. Some people say, well, I think it's better to feed live because it's more natural for the snake. There's nothing natural about putting a prey animal in an enclosed space with a predator and letting the prey animal defend itself against the predator. That's not natural, okay? However, sometimes with pit vipers, it's easier to get them started eating when we do feed them live. And after we get a few meals in them, then we kind of start transitioning them to rats that are freshly killed. I'll kill it myself and put it in there. Once they do that well, then we'll transition them to mice or rats out of the freezer. We'll thaw the rat or mouse out completely and get it room temperature. Start feeding it that way. So it takes a process depending on the type of snake you got. So after about a month or so, the rattlesnake ate the very first time I put a rat in there. If he had not eaten it within a minute or two, because I wasn't going to leave it unattended. You don't ever do that. I would have taken the rat out. I would have had to disturb the snake and get in there and get the rat out of the enclosure, but we didn't do that. And he's never missed a meal since when I feed him that way. He does really well. Now back to the anaconda, the big 18-foot long reticulated python I had. So that snake, as far as food, as far as it eating, I mean, this snake could accommodate pretty large prey animals, okay? But we weren't going to feed it anything crazy, but we were going to feed it, a 10 or 15-pound rabbit, which was kind of small for the snake, to be honest with you, because we could feed him a few of those, but it would not eat. It had problems with shedding its skin, so it had some medical issues going on. It had an upper respiratory infection, had to get antibiotics for that. If you've ever tried to give a snake an injection with a needle, you can't hold them still when they're this big, because when you you can hold the snake and you can put your arms on it and hold it, but when you go to stick that needle in to inject the antibiotic and the snake twitches and jumps so hard, it just bends your needle, it is tough giving a snake that big an injection when they don't want it, okay? So we got it done, and we got the infection cleared up. We ended up getting a shed situation cleaned off of him and cleaned up, and the snake did not eat for the first month that we had it. Okay, can you imagine not eating for a month? I am looking at the time. I'm ready for the podcast to be over because I'm ready to go eat some leftover Thanksgiving food, okay? So I can't imagine not eating for a month. Jesus did it. He went, 40 days, okay? I see somebody fast for 40 days. Good Lord. But the snake did not eat for 2 months, then 3 months, then 4 months, then 8 months. Had it for a year. 1 year. And this snake, I'm not using it for education. I'm not doing anything with it because it's not eating. I don't want to stress it. It's just living in this huge enclosure in my building, breathing air, occasionally drinking water, and not eating for a year. Yes, 1 year, 12 months. Then 13 months. Then 14 months. It decided to eat. So I don't know what the record is. I'm sure there's probably even longer than that. But The snake I've had go the longest without eating any type of food at all was Worm. Its name was Worm. Yeah, was Worm, the reticulated python, 18 feet long or so, and she went 14 months without one single thing to eat. But then once she ate the first meal, she was good to go. She every time I offered food, she ate. I don't know what took her so long. She wasn't hungry, I guess. But anyway, years ago, I used to buy mice and rats that we would feed. And there's still a lot of people who sell mice and rats. They raise them and sell them to pet stores or sell them to individuals. You can buy them in bulk. And there was somebody that sold mice and rats, and I bought some from them, and I was feeding some snakes that the state had asked me to hold and said, so these were not my snakes. These were on loan to me from the state of Georgia. I'm holding these snakes. I'm caring for these snakes. And I go in and I feed several mice and rats that are in these Ziploc bags. They're frozen out of my freezer. I thaw them out. I feed them to these snakes. And I don't remember how many snakes I fed that night. I want to say it was around 20 different snakes or so that I fed. Well, the snakes that were fed out of this one batch of mice and rats, the next day, all of those snakes were dead. Yeah, it was pretty devastating. There were some really cool snakes, and they were dead. And I knew it had something to do with what they ate, because the only thing they had in common was those snakes that died were the ones that ate out of these particular frozen bags of mice and rats. So I contacted the state, and they're like, okay, yeah, we'll figure this out. So send them to us. They sent them off wherever they sent them to. They did a necropsy. A necropsy is the fancy word for autopsy for animals. You do autopsies on people, do necropsies on animals, I guess. Ended up coming back saying that it was basically the snakes died due to a type of pesticide. Pesticide, what in the world? So I ended up talking to the person who owned this company and was, selling mice and rats commercially. They sold thousands of them to pet stores and all this stuff. I said, yeah, we have an outbreak of mites that get on the mice and rats. So we started treating the mice and rats with permethrin, ever how you pronounce this very strong, powerful pesticide. I said, well, how do you treat the mice and rats? He said, we just go in with a spray, and we open the enclosure, we spray their food, we spray their water, we spray the mice and rats, we just spray them all down. I said, and then after you spray them, how long do you wait until you euthanize the mice and rats and bag them up and then sell them? He said, sometimes it's the same day. So you're spraying poison on a rat, and the same day you're bagging it up and freezing it to sell to people for food? Hopefully you're as confused about this as I was. I was just completely shocked. Anyway, so I didn't get any mice and rats from them again. But most of what the mice and rats I have, most of them I raise myself. I don't sell mice and rats to people. A lot of people will say, hey, can I buy mice and rats from you? No, I just raise just enough to feed the animals that we have. But at one point, a few years ago, there was like a shortage. There was a shortage of mice and rats, even among breeders. And like you couldn't get them for, I don't know, it was a few weeks it was like this. That's the time I decided I'm just going to raise mice and rats myself, because I've got animals that we're doing programs with, and when they're not doing programs, they're here to rest and recuperate and eat and live and de-stress. I need to be able to feed them, and so I've got to have a steady supply of mice and rats. Mice and rats, raising those, I hate it. It is not fun. They stink. It is the last thing of the day I do. I'll go feed the mice and rats. The last thing, then I go take a shower because they just stink, and then you stink being in there with them, and I don't like it. And I spend more time cleaning rodent cages and feeding them and taking care of the water than I do with the snakes. They require a lot of time. But the money I save on the mice and rats, raising them myself, is a lot cheaper than buying, because they're pretty expensive to buy. And the other thing is, too, you don't want to get bit by one. I've been bit by a bear. I've been bit by a lot of stuff. If I told you about the ostrich that almost killed me, if I haven't told you that, I need to tell you that story one day. That was bad. I've been bit by a lot of different. I got bit by a snow macaque monkey It jumped onto my shoulder. I was drinking a Mountain Dew, wearing a baseball cap. It took my Mountain Dew, took my hat, climbed to the top of a cage and drank my Mountain Dew and left my hat up there. I'll never forget that macaque bit me right here right there. It hurt too. I've been bit by a few things, but I think the worst bite, the second worst bite I've ever had was from a rat. And it was one of my rats. It was not a wild rat. It was one of my domestic rats. And I was raising rats, and she had some babies in her cage. And I reached in to do something, and she bit the tip right here of my right index finger, and her teeth, went to the bone, and it hurt so bad. That was the worst bite, the second worst bite of any animal I've ever had, for sure. Raising mice and rats is not the greatest. But I've been raising mice and rats off and on since I was a teenager, since I was a kid. And my mom, you've heard my greatest fear. If you don't know my greatest fear, go back and listen to the podcast called Fears, and you'll know what I don't like, what I'm afraid of, okay? I'll tell you what my mom's afraid of. My mom is afraid of weird stuff. It doesn't even make any sense. She's afraid of mice and rats and birds, chickens. She's afraid of chickens. My mother is afraid of a chicken. She's a chicken, okay? If you catch a Rhode Island Red laying hen, a tame hen, and you hold it gently and you walk to her with it, she will flip out. Now, if you let it flap its wings, she'll really flip out, which, maybe that's why she's scared of them, because I do that to her. But that's what she's afraid of. And so I don't know how I did it. I remember when I lived at home when I was a kid, before I had a driver's license, I would beg her to let me have a snake. When she finally let me have a snake, there were times where I was able to talk her into going to the pet store and getting some mice to bring home, some little white mice they'd buy at the pet store to bring home to me. And if you've ever bought these at a pet shop, they put them in a cardboard box, which is the thinnest cardboard ever manufactured by mankind. And they have these little air holes in them that are way too big, and the mouse can stick his head almost all the way out of the hole and then chew the hole on your 10 to 15 minute car ride home. So by the time you get home, you got a mouse with his head out, or you have a mouse that's all the way out of the box. And I'll never forget being at home one day and just hearing a horn blowing, and I look out the door. My mom was at the road, won't even come to the driveway. She's gotten out of the car, and the mouse is coming out of the box. She's abandoned her car on the side of the road. I had to go down there and get it. She's absolutely terrified. But somehow I was able to talk her into letting me have a couple of rats in a cage in my bedroom inside my house. I don't know why I did this, because they stink so bad, but I did. And they had babies, and I was raising the babies. I don't think I told her they had babies, because she would have made me get them out. But anyway, something happened, and somehow, I don't know if I didn't lock the lid or what I did, but I got up one morning to go to school, and I looked, and there were no rats at all in this cage. No rats at all. And there had been about, 17 or 18 rats in this cage, and now it is completely empty. So I'm like, okay, my options here are to just go to school and not worry about it, or go tell my mom and deal with whatever she does. So I went to school and didn't worry about it. And I came home, and that night, because I always fed them at night, not all of them, most of the rats were sitting on top of the cage waiting to be let in so they could eat. So I was like, this is great. This is great. It did take a few more days, maybe a week, to find the other 2 or 3. And I did not tell my mom about that until a long time later. I'd already gotten the rats out of the house, and like a lot of time had passed by. And I told her that. But that can happen. It happened another time when I was out of town. I was in North Georgia doing an event somewhere, and some guy shows up at the event and says, "Hey, I brought you a box of mice." I'm like, oh, that's nice. You know, I don't want frozen ones from anybody because you don't know what's on them or what's happened to them. I don't want to feed those. But if they're live, I can put them in an enclosure. I can keep them for a while. And after keeping them for a while, I know that, you know, they're okay to be fed. So he gives me a box of mice, and he doesn't tell me how many mice are in the box. It's just a box of white mice, right? So I put them in my passenger seat, and I'm on interstate. If you know anything about Georgia, I'm in North Georgia. I'll never forget this. I was on I-985 in North Georgia on the interstate, and it was nighttime because this was in January. I remember this. I remember where I was. It was in January, and I'm driving from the venue where I just did a show to my hotel. I'm like, you know, I'm really hungry. So I stop and I order me a hamburger, a cheeseburger, and fries at a fast food restaurant. And I'm driving on the interstate at night by myself in the vehicle. There's a box of mice on the passenger seat, and my cheeseburger and my fries are sitting on the middle console. And so I'm driving on the road, eating my fries, eating my cheeseburger, drinking my drink, heading to the hotel. And then all of a sudden, when I reach in to get some fries out, I'm like, what is that? Yes, exactly what you think it was. It was a mouse in my fries. Yeah, in my fries. I'm like, oh. Immediately, what comes to my mind is the rat that bit me on the finger and went to the bone years ago. The second worst bite I've ever had of any animal. Horrible. I don't want to get bit and then wreck. Like, what happened to Jason? A mouse killed him. Okay, so I'm trying to stay calm, and there's traffic, and it's so there's a cooler in my floorboard. I'm able to get the cooler open, and I've kind of dropped the mouse over into this cooler, right? And I'm like, oh God. Then, because if you know me, I hardly ever wear like pants. I'm always wearing shorts, and then I feel something crawling on the back of my leg behind my knee, like going up in the bottom of my shorts, and I reached on and grabbed it. It was another mouse. I'm like, oh man, how did he get way over here? So I put him in the cooler. I don't want to put him back in the box because they're getting out of the box. And I'm like, okay, how many are loose? How many mice are loose in this truck? So I grab the box. I turn my interior light on. I'm not eating the food anymore. There's mice in it. I throw the food back in the bag, and I'm open the box as I'm driving, and I'm trying to count how many mice. I'm like, you know, it doesn't even matter if I count the mice. I don't know how many mice he gave me. If there's a dozen mice in here, was there 13 before? Was there 40 before? I have no idea. This is horrible. So as I'm driving to the hotel, I just keep on going, and I'm catching mice as I'm driving down the interstate. End up getting all the mice except for one, which is why I sold the truck. I sold that truck because of a mouse. I don't know where he went. I mean, you think of where a mouse can go in a vehicle. They can chew a hole under a seat and get it. I mean, there's no telling where they can go. But in the summertime, because it obviously died, you know, I didn't have mouse food and water for it to drink in there. I didn't know it was in there. I thought I got them all. But you could smell it, and it was horrible. And in the summer, you would smell it. And I was like, I can't clean this out. I can't get rid of this. So anyway, I sold the truck in the cooler months. Yeah. What do you do? I didn't know what to do. There's a lot of people that get mice in their vehicles. If you park it, that's why I try not to park, especially in cooler months, like near like shrubbery and bushes and tall grass, because mice will get up in there and chew wires and all that kind of stuff. We'll keep on going, and we'll be done here, man. I got a couple more things I want to tell you. I want to tell you about the guy who was trying to feed his reptile and it almost killed him, that I got called about, I had to go deal with. This will be kind of a cool story. You know, as far as feeding snakes, you know, they eat mainly mice, at least the ones I keep, eat mice and rats and rabbits and things. There's a lot of snakes that don't eat mice and rats. Sometimes people want to keep a snake, say, well, you know, I would have a pet snake if it didn't eat mice or didn't eat rats. Do you have any that eats, you know, carrots or vegetables or something? The answer is no, but there are some snakes that don't eat mice and rats. What is a snake that lives off of something other than mice and rats in the wild. Now, I know in captivity you feed these mice and rats. The eastern hognose snakes. So eastern hognose snakes, southern hognose snakes, western hognose snakes. In the wild, they primarily eat toads. That's what they eat. And western hognose snakes in captivity, it's a lot easier to get them to eat mice and get them off of toads. Why would you not want to feed them toads? Well, a lot of pet shops don't stock toads to sell like they do mice. And if they did, the toads are probably more expensive. You can find toads in your yard, but a lot of times they'll carry parasites and things like that, which can be passed on to your snake. So it's best, if you can, to feed them mice and rats. It's much easier to do that. And you have to, give them a pre-killed mouse or rat, because the hognose snake doesn't have the capability really to kill like a full-grown mouse if it's an adult hognose. But that's one example of a snake that you could feed it something other than mice or rats, would be a hognose. Even though my hognose snakes that I keep, we feed them mice. But, most of the snakes that I think about that don't eat mice or rats are not snakes that I would want to keep. Because even though they're not eating mice and rats, the things that they do eat are kind of hard to come by. For instance, you've got crayfish snakes. Here in Georgia, we have a glossy crayfish snake, a striped crayfish snake. You have a snake that's related to crayfish snakes that's called the rainbow snake. And then you have a snake that's related to them, the mud snakes, and you have the queen snake. Yes, the queen snake that's related to the crayfish snake, because the mud snake's related to the rainbow snake. Anyway, those snakes eat a lot of different things. Your queen snakes and crayfish snakes obviously eat crayfish. In Georgia, they're crawfish, okay? So at least that's what I call them. Then you've got your mud snakes, your rainbow snakes. They eat a lot of things, but one thing they're famous for eating is like amphiumas, sirens. Some people don't even know what an amphiuma is. It's a big, long, skinny salamander, kind of cool thing. Then you got coral snakes. Coral snakes, I don't keep coral snakes because coral snakes are snake eaters, and I don't have a steady supply of snakes that I want to feed to another snake. And even if I did, coral snakes are very secretive snakes. They don't really do well being on display. It stresses them out. So if you put a coral snake on display, it needs a place to hide and be invisible. Well, then that's kind of defeats your point of displaying it, because you can't see it. So I don't really see a point in keeping coral snakes. Then you got cobras. There's a lot of cobras that eat different things, but like your king cobras are snake eaters. I went to a zoo that gave me a behind-the-scenes tour of their king cobra, and basically what they told me they do is they'll get a dead snake, and they will rub the dead snake all over a rat and try to transfer some scent. Then they throw the dead snake back in the freezer and feed the rat. And they do it again until the dead snake gets kind of so bad they can't use it. They have to get another dead snake. And that's how this one place I went to feeds their king cobra. Then you've got, your garter snakes eat primarily fish, amphibians, things like that. So you can feed certain fish to garter snakes. Then you've got egg-eating snakes, which, I don't know, they're not like chicken eggs. They're small eggs these snakes eat. If you have a steady supply of those, if you raise quail or something, you might be able to do it. But it's just harder to keep those snakes that don't eat mice and rats. And there's even more. There's snakes here in Georgia. Your DeKay's brown snake. Those primarily eat soft-bodied insects, earthworms, slugs, things like that. But they don't really do that great in captivity. King snakes will eat. One question we get all the time is, hey, can you put a king snake in my yard, because they eat the venom? They'll say they eat the bad snakes, and then they also keep them away. Well, no, they don't. They don't keep snakes away from your yard, okay? There's been several instances of people finding copperheads and rattlesnakes coiled up under the same piece of tin as a king snake. So king snakes eat a lot of things: mice, bats, rats, chipmunks, squirrels, frogs, lizards, toads, as well as other snakes, including non-venomous snakes. They'll eat other king snakes. They'll eat other venomous snakes. But they're not keeping snakes away, because, a copperhead isn't going to crawl into your yard and say, oh, there's a king snake here. Hurry, leave this yard. That's not how that works. But king snakes are talked about being immune to the venom of venomous snakes. Well, that's partly true. But if we take an eastern king snake, for instance, the most common king snake in Georgia where I live, and we take that king snake to a different part of the country, a different part of the world, and that snake gets bit by a venomous snake that's not from where that snake is naturally, they don't really have the same immunity to that. So these immunities are built up over a long period of time to snakes that live where they live. Even then, I think they're not immune to coral snakes. So king snakes are immune to the venom of pit vipers, your copperheads, your cottonmouths, your rattlesnakes, of those that live where they live. This last story of someone who got bitten by their pet snake and almost died. This was many, many years ago, and I was on vacation in Florida at the time with my family, and I had law enforcement in Georgia, the game warden, call, and they said, "Hey, Jason." I said, "Yeah." They said, "Where are you?" I said, "Why are you looking for me?" They said, "Well, we need to know if you can go to this location in Georgia where a person who has been bitten by their pet rattlesnake." I said, "Oh my gosh, what happened?" Basically what happened was this was a professional. And did educational programs about snakes and kept native snakes in captivity to teach people their importance, which I think is great. But accidents can happen. Things can go wrong when you got deadly snakes. So he goes in to feed a few of his snakes, and I don't remember what all he had, but there were 3 or 4 or 5 snakes that he had. I know one was a copperhead, and I know one was an eastern diamondback rattlesnake. And I don't remember exactly, but I want to say he had this rattlesnake for about 8 years. He'd had this rattlesnake for 8 years, and he had it since it was a little tiny, little baby, newborn eastern diamondback rattlesnake. So he had raised the snake for 8 years. And if you don't know what hemostats are kind of like big tweezers. They have little round handles like you put your fingers in, like a pair of scissors. They're long, and you can get them in different lengths. They've got some that are 6 inches long, 8 inches, 12 inches. They go all the way up. I've got a set that's like 24 inches long, hemostats. And basically what you do is you take a dead mouse or a dead rat and you hold the dead animal with the hemostats and you put it down in front of the animal you're feeding. Now, if you're feeding a non-venomous snake, you still want to use hemostats and not your hand, because the snake may not know the difference in the little tiny mouse you're holding. He may see your whole hand and think, "Oh, that's too big for me to eat. I'm not going to eat that." If it's a pit viper like a copperhead or a cottonmouth, 2 problems are, they can detect your body's heat signature, your temperature, and they see your hand glowing red. They think that's a prey item, and your hand may be too big for them to eat, so they don't want to eat it. Or they may say, "Oh, that's what I'm supposed to eat." Then they try to eat that, which if it's a venomous snake, you can die. So that's why you use hemostats to offer that. The hemostats are made of metal, so they're air temperature. So as far as a pit viper feeding off these, there's no heat signature being put off by the metal, and it just notices the little rat or mouse hanging off the end of it. He goes in there this morning to feed his eastern diamondback rattlesnake a rat. Now, I said he's had it since it was a baby, but now it's eating rats because he's had it for 8 years, and this snake is probably about this big around and somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 feet long. And it can get bigger than this. Eastern diamondback's the largest rattlesnake in the world. They get bigger than this, but even at 4 foot, it has a massive amount of venom it can inject per bite. But he's fed it for 8 years, and he takes his right hand, and he's got the hemostats, and he's got them out, and he's got the little rat on the end. He goes in to feed it. The problem is the hemostats he's using, he's also had them for 8 years. And feeding a little tiny baby rattlesnake with these 12-inch long hemostats may be appropriate. But it's not appropriate if it's a 4 foot long rattlesnake, which can possibly strike over half of its body length. So you got a 4 foot snake that has a 2 foot plus strike range with 12-inch hemostats. What do you think is going to happen at some point? Exactly what did happen. He goes to feed it, and the snake comes in and bites him right here, somewhere in this area. I think it bit his finger, his index finger, and right in the back of his hand. Somewhere in this area, it bit him. The story I remember, I don't know the exact numbers. They life flighted him to the hospital, And I want to say he received 40 plus vials of antivenom to save his life. His hospital bill was pretty big. I think Life Flight, it was on there. This was years ago. It was like $1,000 a minute. I'm sure that's probably increased tenfold by now. He survived it. And but it almost killed him. It's literally almost killed him. And so I had to go to his house when I was called for because he didn't want the snakes back. He's like, I love these snakes and I want you to take care of them, but it's time for me to part with them. And I'm not going to do this anymore. And I understand that, because he knew what he was doing, but he made a mistake that almost cost him his life. Yeah, it was sad. I get to his house and I go in there and I'm looking at these enclosures, and man, it was a sobering thing to see because I'm about to open this rattlesnake's cage and I'm going to take the snake out that just bit its owner. And all I see all over this cage is blood. There's blood on the floor. There's blood all over this cage everywhere. And I was just started trying to picture, man, just trying to imagine what that scene was like and imagine if that was me, what would be going through my head if all this happened. This is going to just about bring us to the end of episode number 14 of the SnakesAreUsTV podcast. But, as we're talking about Thanksgiving, getting together with family or not getting together with family, getting together with friends or not getting together with friends, or spending this time alone, or some people, have a hard time, not just with Thanksgiving, but the holidays as a whole, Christmas and everything else that's coming up, New Year's. Some of this can be a really tough time of year for some people, especially when you're dealing with family. For instance, I mentioned my sister earlier, my sister Carmen. Me and her had this rivalry going on. It's been going on for a few years. I think it's important, if you have a problem, to admit you have a problem. And that can be hard to do for some people, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you, there's a problem that I have. I don't share this with a lot of people, but I do recognize it's a problem. But the problem with this problem is that I kind of enjoy it, is that when I play a board game and I win, I want everybody to know I won. I gloat really bad. The game that my sister challenged me to years ago, which she now realizes is a huge mistake, was Monopoly. Because I just happen, I don't know why, I just happen to be really good at it. And she's not, at all. And so, seriously, if we play 20 games of Monopoly, she will win maybe one of them, and that's only because I'm tired. What we did is we came up with a trophy system here. This is our Monopoly, our family Monopoly trophy. It says a Monopoly champion of the universe and beyond. Whoever wins at Monopoly in my family gets to keep this. And the cool thing about that is I have never had to relinquish it. It just lives right here, and it's gotten so used to just being with me, Like even today, I offered to let my sister play Monopoly with me. She did not want to. And so this is me crushing defeat and just sitting on top of her, looking at my trophy. So sometimes when you go to families' houses, you do have to, deal with people. I have to deal with my loser sister. But, even if you're dealing with people who are much more difficult than my sister that I have to deal with, I always tell people God has a very specific plan for every single person. And so before you're born, he's ordered your steps, and he's got a plan. You don't have to follow the plan. You don't have to walk by it if you don't want to. Most people don't. But if you want to, he's got a specific plan. And if you understand that and you go into a situation like Thanksgiving or the Christmas season, Christmas holidays, you're having to deal with people you don't have to deal with but once a year, and it's kind of hard to do that. You get a lot more confidence in yourself when you realize that your steps are ordered by God, and that every situation you're put in, if you're following those things, that God will kind of lead you into those situations. And the Bible says God does not cause confusion. He's not the author of confusion. God is not confused. And so if you're confused, you might not be exactly where you need to be and need to focus more on him, because confidence comes by knowing that your steps are ordered. And when you are around, I don't know if this is going to help anybody or not, but when you're around certain people, whether these are close family members, distant family members, or even friends, you do need to use discernment. Discernment is something you should probably pray for discernment, because as you're around people, that's the key to relationships, is being able to discern who you're around, what their intentions are. Because you know what you see when you're around a pastor. You know what you see. And then also remember 3 types of people, to specifically remember these 3 types of people, is the people who helped you when you were in difficult times. When your life was the hardest, when you're going through hell, the people who were there with you that helped you, make sure you remember them. The second type of person to always remember is the person or the people who, when you're in difficult times, who left you. So remember the people who left you when you were in difficult times, the people who helped you, the people who left you. Forgive them. Always forgive them, for sure. The third type of person that you really want to remember just to protect yourself is the person or the people who put you in difficult times. So people who helped you, people who left you, and people who put you there. Use discernment. Know who those people are, because your purpose here is not to please people. It's to please God. That's what we should be focused on. But most of us encounter problems in our family or problems in our life. A lot of us sometimes don't want to really look at ourselves and change ourselves. We're more interested in changing our circumstances that we're in than changing ourselves while we're in the circumstances that we're in. Because sometimes the circumstance you're in it because of some choices that you made. So don't always just think that the answer to your problem is getting out of the circumstance. Sometimes you're in the circumstance so you can grow through this. Because, your character will always be tested in private when you're not around anybody. Your character is tested in private before it's ever displayed in public. Who you are in private when you're by yourself, who you are in private when you're around your close friends and family, that's who you are. Who you are when you're just on display to the public, that's not who you are. So just make sure the person that you're wanting people to see, that's who you are in private too, okay? Anyway, don't know if that's helped anybody or not. I'm kind of talking to myself when I say these things more than I'm talking to anybody else. The last thing that I do need to make sure you guys understand before I leave is Jesus loves you, and so do I. You guys have a wonderful, wonderful day.
If this episode entertained you, educated you, or simply distracted you from your responsibilities, consider giving it a 5-star review or even just a thumbs up. It helps this podcast slither into the ears of unsuspecting listeners everywhere and tells the algorithm that I'm doing something right. Thank you for joining me, and I'll catch you next week on the Snakes Are Us TV podcast.